We begin today with a beauty queen, 22-year-old Susana Flores Maria Gomez. She won Model of the Year in 2009, and in 2012 she was named Miss Oriental Tourism Mexico, whatever that means. So she participated in this Miss Oriental Tourism international contest in China. Unfortunately, Susana Flores Maria Gomez is dead. I forgot to tell you that she was also named Miss Sinaloa in 2012. Apparently, her boyfriend was a drug trafficker. She was killed with him and 3 others, and an assault rifle was found next to her body. She was actually, back then in 2012, was the third beauty queen in recent years to have been publicly linked to narco trafficking. In truth, it is far more common than many realize. Beauty queens are much like the low-level cartel enforcers, predominantly young men in that case, but who enter the life of organized crime for the lure of money, opportunity, need, etc., or a mix of all these factors. As the author of a book on narco culture and beauty queens writes, quote, "They are disposable objects, the lowest link in the chain of criminal organizations, the young men recruited as gunmen, and the pretty young women who are tossed away in 2 or 3 years or turned into police or killed." The fact of the matter is that stories like that of Susana Flores Maria Gomez seem to be increasing, not decreasing. And so today we want to try and summarize the status of drug violence and the drug war in Mexico. Back in 2012, President Felipe Calderón left office. The next president was Enrique Peña Nieto. But a few years ago, a new president came to the fore, Andrés Manuel López Obrador. So let's recap this term a little bit. Number one, nothing new, just more bodies. First, drug trafficking in Mexico is not a new phenomenon. We've learned that drug trafficking in Mexico is tied to the law of supply and demand that has shaped the border between Mexico and the United States, especially in the last 100 years or so. Not only is drug trafficking not new in Mexico, it's not new in the global world of trade. We learned that psychoactive substances are especially suited to global markets. Imperial powers were the first drug cartels, using opium, alcohol, and tobacco as foundational moneymakers for expanding empires. In Mexico, however, a divergence in drug policy in the early 20th century came to the fore, where the United States became increasingly restrictive on the use of drugs, and where Mexico remained lax. This created the black market that is still around today. From Sinaloa emerged the first organized drug cartels that pushed opium and to a lesser extent marijuana. Chinese immigrants had first controlled the traffic until Mexican xenophobia allowed Mexicans to take over the trade. During World War II, demand grew for opium, but it wasn't until the 1960s and 1970s, with a huge uptick in demand from the United States and its drug users, that the cartels really began to grow. A growing wealth accompanied the growing drug organizations, but at first it was mainly a family affair. Then the ruling pre-governments allowed state officials to regulate the drug trade as they regulated legal industries. Oftentimes these took place with bribes or corruption and backroom deals, and they were all part of this. But the state governments had their rules and responsibilities, and so did the cartels. By the 1980s, heroin and marijuana were not as popular as they once were with hippies. The new drug was cocaine, and the Colombians had the market on that. But we learned that as the drug smuggling routes through Florida were shut down, Mexico began to import and smuggle cocaine as well. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, Mexican drug cartels were increasingly sophisticated. They franchised. When Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo was arrested in 1989, he split up his territory between his lieutenants. This gave rise to the drug cartels in Ciudad Juarez, Tijuana, and in the western and northern parts of Mexico. The eastern part was controlled by another faction, the Gulf Cartel. So, secondly, we can move on to a so called democratization. During the 1990s, drug cartels began to fight one another, but they often made loose alliances as well. And then a fundamental game changer was the so called process of democratization in Mexico, where the PRI was voted out of power and the PAN was voted in. This happened in the year 2000. It began to call into question the arrangements that had been in place for decades between government, police, and drug organizations. It allowed for cartels to take advantage of the new situation, fighting to monopolize the other cartels. What was the best way to do this? Well, the Gulf cartel really was the sort of uh, uh, leader in this. And it was with the use and addition of heavy firepower. They got it when members of Mexican special forces deserted and joined the cartel. Other cartels followed suit. This was a kind of militarization of the drug war that took place, and it was an important step in producing the current violent situation we see today in Mexico. This happened even when Felipe Calderon took office in 2006. But when Calderon took office, he made another decision that increased the violence. He sent in the army, which further militarized the conflict. Groups such as the Zetas borrowed terrorist tactics from the Middle East, all with the goal of eliminating rivals, strengthening their power, and producing fear in the population. So, after 10 years, from 2012 to 2021, almost 10 years, of this current militarized strategy, some places, such as Juarez, have decreased in the body count. The government declared victory as well. However, more likely, what has occurred is the Sinaloa cartel has simply destroyed the Juarez cartel. It remains to be seen whether the Zetas or others will continue to move in again and upset this balance of power. Enrique Peña Nieto, the president from 2012 to 2018, declared that he supported the drug war. And this was obviously a nod to the United States, but he was focused on reducing violence. He tried to create a national police force that took over for the military. But honestly, there didn't seem to be much that he could do to address the underlying problems of the drug trade. He didn't support legalization, or so he said, because he didn't want to risk hurting his relationship with the United States. Judicial reform remained badly in need, and there were some notes of progress in this regard. But it seems likely on the scale needed to really make a dent in the culture of impunity that this is a very deep and ongoing issue. Also, Peña Nieto committed to the same market friendly NAFTA esque policies of presidents since the 1990s. This didn't solve the inequality and lack of opportunities for those that joined cartels on the lower levels. Perhaps the best that can be hoped for in the short term is that new arrangements will be struck between cartels and various government officials, meaning that the need for violence will decrease. Business will keep moving, demand and supply will not be hurt, at least by the war on drugs. A gram of cocaine is still the same amount of money. So, hopefully, you've learned over the course of this term a bit more about Mexico. Hopefully, assumptions that you had about Mexico and the violence there have been contextualized in a global context. Mexico's problems are also the problems of the United States. In a globalized world, US companies outsource manufacturing and industry. In a globalized world, violence has been outsourced as well to Mexico. In this course, we've learned that politics and culture are much more important in forming policy on drugs than biology or common sense. The moral argument put forward to keep drugs illegal has tragic consequences on Mexico and many other producing countries in Latin America. Legalization would not solve drug violence, especially because it would have to be a coordinated global policy of legalization to really undercut the power of the black market. But here is the fundamental irony of the situation. The moral argument for prohibition, that drugs are harmful and should be illegal, has had the unintended consequence of producing one of the most immoral and violent human rights crises in modern history. But yet, in the American popular mind, most individuals don't make that connection. Nearly 6 in 10 Americans see Mexico as a source for US problems instead of a good neighbor. The drug war in the main is the main driver of Mexico's negative image in the United States today, with 72% of Americans naming drug related violence is the main reason for their perception, according to a recent study. That is the only real benefit of a course like this. We can talk and study and learn about why this is wrong and why the perception is flawed, but to see it up close, we've begun to see the underside of globalization. We've seen the faces of its victims. Thank you for staring into that darkness with me. Thank you for believing that this is a subject worth studying. I think, in the main, even though I don't want to leave you with a too, sort of pessimistic vision, that there is real benefit in changing perhaps drug policy from one of law enforcement and criminalization to one of public health and healthcare. There is also a need in a globalized world to coordinate drug policies across national borders. And of course, to continue to create economic opportunities for people throughout the world, especially in Mexico, so that, for instance, getting ahead can be done without having to join up for the cartels. Thanks, and I've appreciated your